She is born on June 18, 1901, at the Peterhof Palace outside St. Petersburg, the fourth daughter of the reigning Tsar of Russia, ruler of the largest empire on earth. Under Russian succession law, only a son can inherit the throne, and by 1901, the absence of an heir has already become a source of public concern. When the birth is announced, the reaction inside the family is one of quiet disappointment. Nicholas reportedly walks alone for some time before he goes to see his wife and their new daughter. His aunt, on hearing the news, responds with open dismay. The baby is named after Anastasia of Montenegro, a friend of the Empress. Within her own household, though, she quickly becomes known for something else entirely. Not for royal composure, but for the opposite of it. This is the account of Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova, the youngest daughter of the last Tsar of Russia, whose death would become one of the most disputed facts of the 20th century. She grows up at the Alexander Palace in Tsarskoye Selo, alongside three older sisters, Olga, Tatiana, and Maria. Despite the family's wealth, the children are raised in a plain, disciplined manner. They sleep on simple camp beds that they make themselves and take cold baths every morning. Within the family, she becomes known as Shvibzik, a Russian nickname meaning something close to imp or little troublemaker. She climbs trees, imitates the servants and visiting dignitaries closely enough to make her own relatives laugh, and once packs a snowball around a stone and throws it at her sister Tatiana, knocking her to the ground. She struggles with arithmetic, writes with erratic spelling, and shows little interest in the formality her position requires of her. Maria and Anastasia, the two youngest sisters, are so close that the family calls them the little pair, while Olga and Tatiana, the two eldest, are the big pair. All four sign their letters using a single combined name, OTMA, built from the first letter of each of their own names, a private mark of how closely they identify as one unit. She is also an enthusiastic amateur photographer, like several of her sisters, and fluent in Russian, English, and French, though she remains, by her own account, a poor student of mathematics. In one letter to a family friend, she complains about her arithmetical problems, writing in exasperation, "Oh, pig and filth." She reads a great deal, favoring the novels of Charles Dickens and the Bronte sisters, and enjoys sketching and playing the piano. In 1904, a fifth child is born. A son, Alexei, the heir the dynasty has waited for. Within weeks, his parents discover he has hemophilia, a disorder in which blood does not clot normally. Any fall or bruise can cause internal bleeding that lasts for days and threatens his life. Nicholas and Alexandra keep the diagnosis secret from the Russian public. Searching for anything that might ease their son's suffering, they seek help from Grigory Rasputin, a wandering religious figure whose presence, for reasons never fully explained, appears to calm the boy during his worst episodes. Alexandra becomes convinced Rasputin is the only person capable of keeping her son alive. In the autumn of 1912, this conviction is tested directly. An 8-year-old Alexei suffers a severe internal hemorrhage after a fall during a family holiday in Poland. For several days, his survival is in doubt, and a formal announcement of his death is drafted in advance. Rasputin, contacted by telegram, sends word that the boy will live. Alexei recovers. The episode leaves Alexandra with complete, lasting trust in Rasputin. His influence over the family increases accordingly, and so in the years that follow does public suspicion of him and of the monarchy itself. Decades later, genetic testing on the family's remains confirms that Alexei's illness was hemophilia B, and that one of his sisters, Anastasia, or possibly Maria, carried the same mutation without ever showing symptoms of it herself. When the First World War begins in 1914, Olga and Tatiana, the two eldest sisters, train as Red Cross nurses and work directly in the hospital wards, assisting in surgeries and amputations. Maria and Anastasia are considered too young for certification. Instead, they visit wounded soldiers near Peterhof, reading to them, playing games, and keeping them company. Anastasia's letters from this period describe a teenager fully capable of talking easily with grown men, recovering from war wounds, trading jokes, and, by her own admission, cheating at cards. Even as the war intensifies, the family continues to live apart from ordinary Russian society, with little direct contact with the public. Meanwhile, the war weakens Russia's economy and public morale, and Alexandra's dependence on Rasputin becomes a matter of open scandal. In December 1916, a group of noblemen assassinate him, hoping to save the monarchy from the damage his presence has caused. It is already too late. By March 1917, mutiny within the army and open unrest in the capital leave Nicholas with no way to hold power. He abdicates, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule and hoping to prevent a wider civil war. Anastasia, not yet 16, and her family are placed under house arrest at the Alexander Palace. Guards who once saluted them now search their rooms and read their letters. Her daily life changes completely from this point forward, though no one in the family yet understands how much worse conditions will become. In August 1917, the provisional government moves the family roughly 1,400 miles east to the Siberian town of Tobolsk. They are housed in the former governor's mansion, a plain 2-story building that the guards, without apparent irony, have named Freedom House. Conditions here are restrictive but not yet severe. The guards are not always kind. Some scrawl insulting graffiti on the walls and benches the family uses, and conditions grow noticeably stricter after the Bolsheviks seize power in October 1917, when the family's remaining privileges are steadily withdrawn. Even so, the family keeps a daily routine of lessons with their tutors, walks in a small enclosed yard, and card games in the evening. They spend their last Christmas together in Tobolsk in 1917, decorating a tree, exchanging handmade gifts, and holding services in a chapel they improvise inside the ballroom, using the Empress's own lace bedspread as an altar cloth. Olga writes to a friend that despite everything, it is one of the closest holidays the family has ever spent together. None of them yet know it is also their last. In April 1918, fearing a rescue attempt by monarchist sympathizers, the new Bolshevik government orders Nicholas, Alexandra, and Maria moved further west to Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains. Alexei is too ill from a recent bleeding episode to travel. Anastasia remains in Tobolsk with Olga, Tatiana, and their brother for several more weeks, helping to manage the household and care for Alexei, before the 4 of them are reunited with their parents in late May. Their new home is the Ipatiev House, renamed by its Bolshevik guards the House of Special Purpose. The windows are painted over. Guards, numbering roughly 300 in total, are ordered to remain indifferent to the family's presence. Isolation here is close to total. By July, the family has been confined to the house for more than 2 months. On July 14th, a priest is permitted to conduct a short liturgy inside the house. He and his deacon later report that the family, against custom, drops to its knees during the prayer for the dead, and that the daughters no longer sing the responses as they usually would. One of the men remarks to the other that something appears to have happened to the family since his last visit. Yet the following day, July 15th, Anastasia and her sisters are recorded as being in unusually good spirits, joking with a group of women brought in to scrub the floors and whispering to them whenever the guards look away. At one point, when the commandant Yakov Yurovsky turns his back, Anastasia sticks her tongue out at him. Just after midnight on July 17, 1918, Yurovsky wakes the family and tells them they are being moved to a safer location, as fighting is approaching the city. It is a lie. He leads all 11 of them, Nicholas, Alexandra, their 5 children, their physician, and 3 remaining servants down into a small basement room. Alexandra, unwell, asks for a chair. One is brought for her, and a second for Alexei, who cannot stand for long on his own. They wait. A truck, they are told, is coming to carry them onward. Instead, an execution squad enters the room. Yurovsky later writes that he had prepared 12 revolvers in advance, one for each intended victim, and assigned each man in the squad a specific target. He reads aloud an order from the Ural Regional Soviet condemning Nicholas to death. Nicholas has time to say only, "What? What?" before he is shot. What follows is not organized. The room fills immediately with smoke and dust. The guards, packed into a small space and firing at close range, can barely see or breathe. Several of the assigned guards, having grown familiar with the family over the preceding weeks, refuse at the last moment to fire on the daughters, reducing the size of the shooting squad. Anna Demidova, the Empress's maid, survives the first volley and is chased across the room with bayonets while trying to shield herself with a pillow that, unknown to her killers, is also stuffed with jewels. In the preceding weeks, Alexandra and her daughters had sewn pounds of diamonds and other jewels into their corsets and clothing, intending to use them later to buy their way to safety. The gems accidentally deflect several of the first bullets, and the daughters do not fall as expected. The shooting continues for close to 20 minutes. Guards resort to bayonets, then to more gunshots fired at close range. Anastasia is stabbed and then shot before the room is finally quiet. Also killed in the basement is Anastasia's small dog. Investigators later calculate that around 70 bullets were fired in total. The bodies are driven to a forest outside the city and stripped so that any remaining jewels can be recovered. They are doused in sulfuric acid in an attempt to prevent identification and lowered into an abandoned mineshaft at a site called Ganina Yama, which proves too shallow to conceal them. Over the following 2 nights, the killers moved the remains to a second location, a field known as Poroshenkov Log, burying most of the group together in a shallow grave beneath a rural road. 2 bodies, Alexei and one of his sisters, are burned separately nearby and buried apart from the others, in what Yurovsky later describes as a deliberate attempt to mislead anyone who might eventually find the main grave. The Soviet government announces only that Nicholas has been executed. It states that his wife and children have been moved to a secure location for their own protection. That false statement stands uncorrected for the next 70 years. In the months that follow, Bolshevik forces kill at least 27 more Romanov relatives and associates across Russia. Because no bodies are produced and no burial site is confirmed, rumors begin almost immediately that some of the family survived. Anastasia, the youngest daughter and by reputation the most spirited, becomes the name most frequently attached to these claims. In 1920, a young woman jumps from a bridge into a canal in Berlin. Rescued and taken to a psychiatric hospital, she refuses to give her name for months. Hospital staff record her only as Fräulein Unbekannt, German for Miss Unknown. When she finally speaks, witnesses describe a Russian accent. Another patient remarks that she resembles Tatiana Romanova. In time, the woman allows others to believe, and eventually states outright that she is Anastasia. She is far from the only claimant. Over the following decades, several other women in Europe and the United States make the same claim. Anderson is simply the most famous and persistent of them. She becomes known publicly as Anna Anderson. Several people who had known the real Anastasia, along with a number of surviving Romanov relatives, support her claim, citing her apparent knowledge of details from inside the palace. Others, particularly relatives on the Empress's side of the family, reject her outright. Investigators later identify her as Franziska Szankowska, a factory worker from Poland who had disappeared from her job around the same time Anderson first appeared. Anderson denies this for the rest of her life. Beginning in 1938, she pursues a legal claim in the German courts to be recognized as Anastasia and to inherit the family's assets. The case continues for more than 30 years and ends in 1970, when a West German court rules that she has failed to prove her claim, though the ruling stops short of declaring outright that she is not Anastasia. She marries an American academic named Manahan in 1968 and dies in Virginia in 1984, having maintained her claim until the end. Her body is cremated. Her story becomes the basis for a French stage play, then a 1956 Hollywood film starring Ingrid Bergman, who wins an Academy Award for the role, and later, in 1997, an animated feature loosely inspired by the same premise. 10 years after Anderson's death, DNA testing on a preserved tissue sample shows no genetic connection to the Romanov family. Her closest genetic match instead comes from a relative of Franziska Shanskowska. The real answer to what happened to the family had by then already been quietly found. In 1979, a Soviet geologist named Alexander Avdonin and a filmmaker named Geli Ryabov locate the main grave outside Yekaterinburg using Yurovsky's own written account. Aware of the political risk of revealing a Romanov burial site under Soviet rule, they rebury what they find and say nothing publicly for another decade. Only after the collapse of the Soviet Union does an official excavation take place in 1991. Investigators recover 9 sets of remains: the parents, 3 of their 5 children, and 4 loyal servants. 2 children are missing entirely. DNA testing conducted in 1994 with the assistance of British forensic laboratories confirms the identities of the 9. To establish a genetic reference point, scientists obtain a blood sample from Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, whose grandmother was the Empress's older sister, making the two related through an unbroken maternal line. His mitochondrial DNA matches that of the remains believed to be Alexandra and her daughters almost exactly, and the same sample is used again in 2007 to help confirm the identity of the second grave. But which 2 daughters are present and which is missing along with Alexei proves difficult to determine from skeletal evidence alone. Russian scientists conclude the missing daughter is Maria. American forensic experts reviewing the same evidence conclude it is Anastasia. The disagreement allows the earlier rumors to continue even after the discovery of an actual grave. On July 17, 1998, exactly 80 years after the killings, the 9 confirmed remains are formally reburied at the Peter and Paul Cathedral in St. Petersburg. President Boris Yeltsin attends and describes the murders as one of the most shameful episodes in Russian history. The Russian Orthodox Church, however, declines to fully recognize the remains as authentic, and its patriarch refuses to officiate. 2 years later, in 2000, the Church canonizes the family anyway, as passion bearers, honoring what it describes as the humility, patience, and acceptance with which they are believed to have faced their deaths, rather than resolving the identification dispute. The Church outside Russia had already canonized them separately in 1981. In the summer of 2007, a small group of amateur searchers finds a second, smaller grave roughly 70 meters from the first, containing 44 burned bone fragments. Testing over the following 2 years, conducted independently by Russian, American, and Austrian laboratories, confirms that these are the remains of Alexei and one of his sisters. A comprehensive genomic study published in 2009 concludes, with very high statistical confidence, that the missing sister is most likely Maria, meaning the remains buried in 1998 under Anastasia's name are most likely, in fact, hers. Many scientists consider this conclusion close to definitive. It has still not settled the matter for everyone. More than a century after the killings, Alexei's remains and those of his sister have still not been buried. They remain in a Russian state archive, awaiting a decision from a church that has never formally accepted the identification, even as government investigators have reaffirmed it multiple times, most recently after reopening the case in 2015, when investigators exhumed the remains of Nicholas's own father, Tsar Alexander III, and gather new samples from living Romanov relatives to strengthen the genetic comparison. Anastasia Nikolaevna Romanova was 17 years and 1 month old when she died in a basement in Yekaterinburg, alongside her entire immediate family. She had spent her short life resisting the formality her position demanded of her, climbing trees, mocking dignitaries, losing patience with arithmetic, sticking her tongue out at the man who would kill her within hours. For most of the 20th century, the world found it easier to believe that a girl like that might have found a way to escape than to accept that she had simply been shot in a small room and buried without a name. It took nearly 90 years, 3 separate grave sites, and repeated rounds of DNA analysis across 3 countries to establish, beyond reasonable scientific doubt, that she had not.